What a year it's been. On Sunday, I was reading an article in the Sunday Times about Billy Connolly. Billy Connolly was a groundbreaker in stand up comedy. Probably he was the British equivalent of Robin Williams, who was also a groundbreaker. And the late Robin Williams and Billy Connolly are quite similar men. They're both intrinsically nice men, but people make the mistake of not realising what serious, deep, and substantial people they are, or were in the case of Robin Williams. Billy Connolly is now 78, and he's quite open and very commendably candid about the fact that he now has Parkinson's disease. When he was 15, he worked as a welder in the Clydeside shipyards in Glasgow. He described the noise in those shipyards as being such that it actually made people's brains shake in their skull. Whether or not that can be diagnosed as contributing to his Parkinson's disease now, it certainly did him no good. He was a 15-year-old starting in a shipyard, and when you're that age, of course, you think you're invincible. Also, he had to work, and there was no health and safety in those days, the 1950s. And one wouldn't see the consequences on a 15-year-old child, but you would see it in much later years. These things do add up. When I was a teenager, my mother absolutely refused to allow me to participate in rugby at my school. Not that I had any interest in it then. I'd have more interest in it now, ironically. But Mum made the point that she didn't know how it might pan out. Now here we have the situation where people who've played rugby over the long term are suffering from serious illness, serious chronic long-term illness as a result. So my mother was right. She had foresight. In Billy Connolly's days as a 15-year-old, they didn't have that foresight. Billy Connolly grew up in very hard circumstances, but he was clear about the fact that the tenements that he grew up in Glasgow are not in themselves a bad place, in his opinion, to live in. Now, there would be many who disagree. Those tenements comprised 1 or 2 bedroom flats. They might have had a sink, but they all shared toilets on the ground floor. However, Connolly made the valid point that it was a very, very close-knit community. Everybody knew everybody. Children could play out in the yard. Okay, it could be filthy dirty out there. But, you know, this is before all the snowflakery of coronavirus kicked in. And everybody knew everybody. His mother, Billy Connolly's mother, was negligent and abusive, and she just abandoned him and his sister Florence when they were infants. And the other people in the tenements heard them crying and realised that those children had been abandoned. Had they been in a suburban house, they'd have starved to death. So the other people in the tenements said, oh, the Connolly kids have been abandoned, and they took them in, and 2 maiden aunts raised Billy and his sister and treated them appallingly. In later life, Billy Connolly then said regarding those people who had neglected and mistreated him in his childhood, don't come back to me now trying to be friends. I don't need you to do that, and I don't want you to do that. The time to have treated me kindly and with respect has long passed. You're not wanted for that purpose now. He's a very serious guy, Billy Connolly, and much of his stand-up routine has actually been, to an extent, a therapeutic rehearsal of what he encountered when he was young. He had a hard life. He had a very hard life. Thomas Sheridan in the past described Billy Connolly as having single-handedly woken up an entire section of society. That's right, I agree. But people make the mistake of thinking that that outrageous and loud character who was such a prominent stand-up comedian in the middle to late 1980s, the Big Ian, that there isn't anything more to it than that. Whereas, in fact, there's an awful lot more to Billy Connolly than that flamboyant and loud character. And if you actually listen to his routine, what he's coming out with is, I mean, he delivers it in a terribly witty way. He was one of the greatest stand-up comedians of all, Billy Connolly was. But it's actually not all that funny. He's describing, in some instances, you know, serious hardship. One of the things that I recall, different people have Billy Connolly, their favourite Billy Connolly moments. And my favourite Billy Connolly moment was when he opened one particular stand-up routine and he said, thank you all for coming, it's great to see you all here, but I need to ask you to do something very, very seriously. He said, you know, when you finish the show today and you go to school or college or work or wherever tomorrow, and you're talking to your colleagues or whoever's in there about the show tonight, please don't do Billy Connolly. because I'm better at doing Billy Connolly than you. And what he's getting at is these people who then, after a Billy Connolly show or even watching a Billy Connolly video, I remember watching it on VHS, they then have to do their impression of Billy Connolly for all the rest of us. That resonated with me when he said it, but I'm actually reflecting upon it more deeply now and realising, whether he was aware of it or not, that he was talking about normies. Normies would see Billy Connolly as this big, loud geezer who's a great bit of gas on the stage, and then they go in and they inflict it upon all the rest of us in work. I remember actually being in a secondary school where I was a teacher, and there was a student teacher there who had been a past pupil of the school. And he came in doing he did Billy Connolly for us. And I had already seen Billy's stand-up routine talking about, please don't do Billy Connolly, I'm better at doing Billy Connolly than you. And I also remember being at a family meal in the house of a member of the family, and one individual did Billy Connolly for us, and when he finished he turned around so we were all supposed to laugh along with this. This particular individual provides his own canned laughter because he's so goddamn unfunny. He needs to tell us that, where we're supposed to laugh at him. My mother smiled politely, but I remember my father and I sat stony-faced. Billy Connolly is a very talented comedian, and, more than that, a very serious and talented and kind and reflective individual. He does not need to be sullied or to be trivialised by normies. But what I reflect upon now, the person at the family meal, the guy in the staff room, they were normies. And they're too stupid to even realise that when Billy Connolly opened his routine by saying, please don't do Billy Connolly, I'm better at it than you, he was mocking them. They're too stupid to realise that. Many years ago, I remember being at an event, and there was a VIP gathering afterwards, and I got in with a very good, now dead friend of mine, Philomena Lynott, the mother of the late Philip Lynott of Tinlizzy. And I will be discreet because it's the better part of valour. I remember there was one member of the original Tinlizzy lineup at that thing. I didn't approach him, he didn't approach me. But somebody else went over and got in his face, and he turned around and told this person to fuck off. I remember at the time thinking that he was exceptionally rude, but I just said nothing. But I did a test. Later on, he was sitting on his own. I walked past him. I said, hey, how you doing? He said, hey, how you doing? He said, who are you? He said, do I know you? No, I said, you don't know me. I said, but. I said, Philip and Caroline lived next door to me in Howth when I was a child, I said. And, of course, I said, until his death at the age of 12. 3 hours later, your man and I were still talking. And that goes to show something. And I won't say what the conversation was about, although I will say one thing. I told that man how very sorry so many people in Howth were and still are at the death of Philip Lynott. And that remains the case because it was, he was 36 when he died. He was a total shaman. He was a total groundbreaker. He totally, when in the high days of Tinlizzy in the 70s, they ripped the rule book up. They were every bit as innovative as the Sex Pistols. They were very, very much out of the box. And it's such a loss. Phil Lynott's death, he used the name Phil Lynott. They all called him Phil Lynott. Philip Lynott's death was a terrible loss to the world. And it's only now in my 40s and in my late 40s I can really see how much was lost. I remember last year meeting another member of the extended Lynott family, and she and I agreed, look at what's happened with social media. Look at how things have opened up. What will Philip be doing now? Because Philip knew Billy Connolly. They were acquainted. And Philip loved Billy Connolly. Philip thought Billy Connolly was brilliant, but Philip would have had the insight into Billy Connolly's dark side. There's a big Jungian thing both with Philip and Billy Connolly. And Philip was a big fan of Billy Connolly, as am I. And this woman and I were saying what a loss Philip's death was. What a terrible, terrible loss Philip's death was. Now we're looking at the way, what would Philip be doing now in the lockdown? How would he be handling this? Philomena was 18 when she had him. She'd be 90 now. It's 80, 90, 80. Philip would be about 71 or 72 now. When you think about it. And time moves on. And it was such a loss. And Tin Lizzie, the ending of Tin Lizzie under Philip Lynott was such a loss. I think my own reflection on Philip was he was not aware of his own giftedness, and he was not aware of his own exceptionality. What a very different person he was, what a groundbreaker he was. And my own surmise is that when he was snubbed for Live Aid in 1985, that had a bad psychological effect upon him. He's not to be blamed for it, but in retrospect we can see that his being snubbed for Live Aid was actually one of the greatest honours around. Who would want to do Live Aid? Johnny Rotten didn't want to do it, neither did Frank Zappa, but they're two hugely clued in guys. What a year it has been. What a year it has been indeed. Things have changed an awful lot this year, and we're not going to be going back to what it was like in February this year. That's not to suggest that I agree with it or support it, I don't. But I accept the reality that huge changes have taken place. But we are dealing with psychopaths, and we must remember that wherever you encounter psychopaths, whatever they're doing, whatever walk of life you come across them in, psychopaths are lazy, they're dishonest, they're incompetent, and they're complacent. Those are 4 key characteristics of all psychopaths. They're lazy, they're dishonest, they're complacent. They're aware of that at some kind of primal level. They know that they're rubbish. So I was watching a documentary last night about the lockdown. I'll just look up exactly. The interview was with a woman called Catherine Austin Fitz, and it was an interview in advance of a film that's going to be, or they say is going to be released in the new year, 2021, called Planet Lockdown. And Catherine Austin Fitz said something that Thomas Sheridan and I have been saying, that this is about money. Well, that's what Johnny Rotten said. It's always about money, and that's right. That's what they said in Watergate, follow the money. This is correct. It's always about money. If you think that Fine Gael are in any way concerned for your health or well-being, then you're very, very, very naive. There's no hope for you if you think Fine Gael are out to help you. They're not, but they're not even out to help themselves, because they are the wicker men in a bigger sense even than Micheál Martin is. Micheál Martin is the wicker man for Fine Gael, but Fine Gael is the wicker man for a much bigger player here. The bigger player is Bill Gates. The Catherine Austin Fitz interview was outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. But she didn't go far enough to say that we're dealing with psychopaths here. And the fact that we're dealing with psychopaths shouldn't be seen as something to alarm us. It should be seen as something to encourage us, because psychopaths are lazy, they're dishonest, they're complacent, and they don't think beyond the short term. So what has happened this year with the lockdown and with the scam around COVID-19 and the burlesquing with the masks, and that is burlesquing, is that they shot the gun too soon. Psychopaths always do that. They always move too quickly. They always shoot the gun too soon. On that subject, yesterday there was a shooting in West Dublin. West Dublin has a lot of trouble with gang violence. Many of these gangs appear to be of African comprisal. So a question arises of how the oldest, whitest country in Europe has found itself to have large amounts of Africans living here. Because we're not in NATO, we didn't bomb their countries. Why have so many Africans arrived in Ireland? Do I have a problem with Africans? No. Don't forget, are Irish people racist? No. Don't forget what a big hero Phil Lynott was. Philip Lynott. When he died in Ireland, there was great grief here when he died in Ireland. He was seen as a real hero here. He was the first big Irish rock star. He was doing it long before you two were. Neither did he ever play the game. He didn't become part of the establishment, Philip. So I'm not listening to professional race baiters like Hazel Chu or Ebon Joseph or Deirdre Mortell or these ones who are making a lot of money from propagating a lie about this country being racist. This country is not racist. This country is not racist. But there was a shooting yesterday in West Dublin of, all of the woke now are saying the boy. He was 27. And we don't know the full story yet, but we do know a lot of the story. It's not like Abbey Lara. There was a lot of doubt and, ambiguity around Abbey Lara. There isn't in the case of this particular young man. George, I think his forename is. There's no question that this man was a violent individual, was a thug, had been on the rampage yesterday, had assaulted and attacked at least 2 people, at least one of whom was a shopkeeper, I think, who was going about his job. Then the Gardaí were chasing him, and they didn't know what quantity they were dealing with. So the notion that there was 15 Gardaí there, to my mind, isn't in the slightest bit disproportionate. They did not know what the situation was, and they did not know if he was leading them possibly to an ambush. So, having 15 Gardaí there, from what I can see, was not in the slightest bit disproportionate. The incident ended with the Gardaí shooting this man dead. He was 27. He was not a boy. Immediately, the race baiters jumped on this. This is like Christmas, New Year, Easter, Halloween, Yule, everything for Ebon Joseph. Because she hasn't had a great year, Ebon. Ebon Joseph is the figurehead of the Irish race baiting NGO industry. They gravitate around her much the way flies do around excrement. And she hasn't had a great year because she's a stupid individual and she shoots out. She's a psychopath. She uses word salad and diagrams and all this kind of thing. She makes a lot of money from what she does. And the NGOs, all the woke race baiting NGOs, do so as well. But it's not been a good year for her because even by her own deplorably low standards, and even considering the 24/7 support she gets from RTE and the Irish Times, she still made a fool of herself regarding 2 statues outside the Shelbourne Hotel. So she needs to, the PR machine, they're working to get Ebon back on track. So she jumped onto this immediately. Hazel Chu jumped onto this immediately. And Hazel Chu, said that she sympathised with the man who was killed. And she didn't sympathise with any of his victims. Now I have to qualify this for the sake of balance by saying that an hour later she then tweeted something very, very qualified and wishy-washy about the people who were assaulted by this man. But it's too late. The damage is done and we've kept the screenshots. Hazel Chu is a race baiter. Ebon Joseph is a race baiter. Deirdre Mortell is a race baiter. Rethink Ireland are race baiters. Lekayla DND, or whatever they called themselves before they blocked me on Twitter, are race baiters. There's big money in this. I want to see something happen within the next 12 months between now and this day next year. I want to see Ebon Joseph out of this country. She wasn't born here. She's not a native to this country. And I don't have a problem with a person who's not born and not a native to this country being in here. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem is when they come in, they insult and disrespect us, they foment seditious activity, as Ebon Joseph is doing, and furthermore, when they're paid for it by our taxes. That's what I have a problem with. Furthermore, she is entitled to express her opinion. But we're entitled to say, you express your opinion on your own time with your own money, not with our money, and not in our time. There's nothing racist or right-wing or far-right about that. Ebon Joseph has made a lot of money from being a troublemaker and from fomenting discord between people in this country, black, white, or whatever ethnicity they are, who otherwise wouldn't be fighting. Black Lives Matter, which is endorsed by our local TD, Aon O'Riordan. Black Lives Matter is a seditious organisation. And it's interesting to see exactly how Black Lives Matter and the rioting in the US, as Catherine Austin Fitz testified in that fascinating video. I'll link it below. how there's this coincidence between all the rioting areas where private property of smallholders in the middle class is being destroyed, and the desirability of that real estate by big money. Or as she calls it, Mr. Global. It's a brilliant term Catherine Austin Fitts used. A brilliant, brilliant woman. I don't know how I didn't know about her before last night. Superwoman Catherine Austin Fitts. So, you know, Black Lives Matter isn't a beneficial or an altruistic organisation. It's far from that. It's a seditious organisation. It's a troublemaking organisation. Would you believe? Would you believe? Would you believe that I, yesterday, around the same time that that man was shot dead in West Dublin, I got a 30-day Facebook ban. So here I am again in Facebook jail until the end of bloody January. Ah well. Just shows that I'm making an impression. The particular thing that I put up was regarding static electrical shock in fake vaginas. Now, I know people who are transsexual. I have friends who are transsexual, including people who have gone through the full operation. I honestly wish them the best luck in the world. And I believe everybody deserves to be treated with respect and not subjected to harassment or violence or hatred or threats. I very firmly believe that. We have legislation in Ireland since 1997, Section 10 of the Non-Fatal Offences Against the State Act, that deals with that. Our new hate speech laws, I talked about it briefly yesterday, are designed just to frighten people. But it's like the mask thing, that's designed to frighten people. It's worked with those who deserve to be frightened, or indeed, as Thomas says, those who are having a ball through this whole thing. You know, it's been an interesting year. And ironically, it's gone like a flash for me. It's flown by for me. Normally I would be down in Donegal, this time with my parents in a hotel. But the hotels are closed for the next 3 months. It'll be interesting to see if they reopen again, or will they be? Is that going to be a real estate grab, as Catherine Austin Fitts so accurately described in her video? You know, are the small and medium-sized hotels in this country going to be seized by hedge funds? What's going to happen to these places? You know, Ireland has a problem with gang violence. We used to. But we have a problem with gang violence, particularly in less settled and affluent parts, say West Dublin and Balbriggan. Balbriggan was never quite Monaco. It was never really noted as being one of the most beautiful places in Ireland, let alone the world. But Balbriggan has had a lot of trouble. And it's emerging now that there's gang violence in Balbriggan. You know, apparently it's racist to try and highlight this, but that's the fact. We need to, using the Fine Gael term, we need to have a conversation about how this has arisen, because I'm 47, I'll be 48 now in 2021, and I don't recall, as a child or as a teenager, there being gangs in this country who did that kind of thing. We had gang violence in this country. It's not to suggest that crime is suddenly a new thing. It is not by any leap of the imagination a new thing. But the way that it manifests itself today is a new thing. Since when did this country become diverse? As I said earlier, we're not in NATO. We didn't bomb anybody. We don't have to take refugees. This leads on to the next thing of having refugees in this country in direct provision. Hopefully 2021 will be the year in which those people are deported. We don't owe them anything. Let them go to Japan or Israel or Switzerland or Saudi Arabia or Turkey or those countries. Let them go to a country at least that's a member of NATO and that actually was involved in some kind of military damage to them. We haven't damaged those people or their homelands. We don't owe them anything. A perception has arisen, whether it's true or not, that refugees are coming into this country and getting free forever homes. Certainly, Fine Gael, in the past month, has reversed in practice a referendum that was held in the 2000s in this country, in which we stated, or which it's very clear that the intention of the Irish electorate was to curtail the conferral of citizenship on as broad a group of people as it had previously been curtailed upon. So Fine Gael are anti-democratic and they're anti-constitutional. They want to overturn this referendum, and they've done so by essentially opening the doors to mass unvetted immigration into this country. But it's up to us to stop them. Catherine Austin Fitz says Mr. Global and all of these psychopaths are actually terrified. They're frightened. And psychopaths are, because they know that they're liars, they know that they're crooks, they know they're lazy, they know they're complacent, they know they're incompetent, and they know they're unappealing. Micheál Martin is not a psychopath, but he has been very badly groomed by psychopaths. He's a sucker, and I've no sympathy for Micheál Martin. I have not one iota of sympathy for Micheál Martin. He's a weak, narcissistic man. His weakness and his narcissism made him want to take the role of Taoiseach no matter what. That immediately proves that he was unsuitable for it. The role of Taoiseach overall has been very seriously degraded by the antics of Leo Varadkar, and also by the fact that Varadkar is a criminal. Varadkar admitted openly to interfering in public selection processes. Nothing has happened because he's the woke messiah of the Irish Times and RTE. So what we're also seeing is that there is this agenda to give a free pass to certain elite individuals. It doesn't extend to Micheál Martin, and that sucker is realising that, or should be beginning to realise that by now. People want an end to the lockdown. They want an end to COVID-19. They want an end to the masks. They want an end to all of this. They want to go back to the way it was in February of this year. In February of this year, I went away for 12 nights to a hotel in Mayo. The hotel closed then about 5 or 6 days afterwards for COVID-19, so I got in just in the nick of time. What I remember was just walking around the village, going down for a cup of coffee in the pub, going to the shops, sitting and chatting with people in the hotels. That's all gone. That's been stolen from us now, and I want it back. I was in the post office in Howth yesterday, and a Karen-type woman was wearing a mask and saying, people just aren't social distancing and they're not cooperating. And, it's just, what can be done about it? And, we're all making our efforts and these people are just breaking it. And I said to her, maybe some people disagree with you. She said, all I want to do is to go back to I want to go back to normal. I said, some of us never left it. Well, she said, people are dying. Have you not watched the news? Oh, I said, if you're referring to RTE in the Irish Times, I know what they're claiming, yes. I know what they're claiming. Well, she said, you're entitled to your opinion. Yes, I said, and you're entitled to yours. I said, but you're not entitled to foist it on anyone else. I said, and by the way, I said, I don't wear a mask. This, I have to laugh. This was the year in which things were turned on their head, and in which I realised that having bad breath is an asset. If you smoke, if you eat a lot of red meat, if you eat a lot of protein and dairy, and if you drink a lot of coffee, you're going to have bad breath. And coffee and cigarettes, particularly red Marlboro, stink. And there's no point in even trying to take mints or trying to cover it up. There's no point. When I was a schoolboy in secondary school, and I remember then in acting school, the fellas, it was always fellas who smoked red Marlboro. They stank. But the problem is that they're good cigarettes. So that's the one you'll get a drag from, so you have to live with it. About 2 weeks ago, a woman told me to step back from her because, I said to her, are you social distancing? No, she said, it's just that you have very bad breath. Oh, I said, well, it proves that your mask doesn't work. So that's an asset. I'd proven to her that, proven without even meaning to or being aware of it, because you never smell your own breath, but I'd proven to her that she was being duped. Well, go me. Go me. These things happen effortlessly. So, what we would consider to be something embarrassing, well, I'm not embarrassed by bad breath, but what we would consider to be something embarrassing has now become an asset. But that's the time we live in. These are strange, strange times. These are really weird times that we're living in. So weird things like that are happening. Billy Connolly talked about the normies. And we've seen that this time. Bill Gates would have referred to them as useless eaters. Yeah, they would be useless eaters. you know. And for me, what happened to me earlier this year, in February this year, was that I gave up on becoming politically motivated in this country, and I shifted gear to simply looking out for number one and looking out for those nearest and dearest to me, including my mother and father and my tribe. The Irish people, after they allowed Fine Gael back in February of this year, deserve whatever they get, and I mean that sincerely. Those who support RTE, the Irish Times, the lockdown, all the rest of it, they deserve whatever they get. I have no sympathy. I mean that sincerely. A lot of us saw, whether we were aware of it or not, that something like what happened this year was coming. And I realised, reflecting upon it, that I cut my losses a long time ago. I'm on welfare now. Not the COVID-19 loan, which is going to kick in next year. People will see the implications of that. But real dole. So I don't really have a dog in the race. And the people who invested and who started businesses are not to be blamed for that, really. Although I would say that there were those of us out there who were watching what was happening. We were watching what was happening. For example, KBC Bank stole from its customers with the tracker mortgage scam, and they got away with it. Now, you know, Fine Gael and RTE would say, oh, you know, but there was a parliamentary inquiry, and there was... Did the people who perpetuated this go to jail, and were they sued for what they did, and did they lose their assets and their capital for the way that they treated those borrowers in the tracker mortgage scam? If the answer to all of those questions is no, then they got away with it. And it's the same thing I remember in 2012, coming to the end of my teaching career. When Fine Gael took office, one of the first things that they did was they skewed the teaching salary scale so that newcomers to teaching, irrespective of their qualifications, were working on 30% less of a salary than those like myself who had entered the system in 2002. So to do the same job, they were being paid 30% less than me. And I talked to people about it, and I said, you see, I don't have a dog in the race. I said, I'm not a victim of this. I'd go to court if I was. If I was among those people, I'd go to court. And somebody said to me, but how can these newly qualified young teachers go to court? Well, there you go, I said. There you go. Fine Gael knew their prey. But that wasn't the point. The point was that there were trade unions, the INTO, the ASTI and the TUI, who condemned this. Oh, it's terrible to treat our young teachers this way. And I've asked every single member of the unions who said this. I've said, did those unions go out on immediate, long-term and indefinite all-out strike for the way that their members were being treated? Because many of these young newly qualified teachers are groomed or approached by the unions when they're doing their teacher training. Join the union, join the union. Why should you join the union? Why should you join the union? That most critical moment, the union did not go out on strike. And that's the nuclear weapon that unions have, to go out and strike, to withhold labour. And I say this to any parent who wants to bitch about teachers. Right, you educate your kids at home. Otherwise, you have to pay respect to us, whether you like it or not. Because you see what it's like if we all downed tools and walked out of schools, and you had to look after the kids at home. And they're seeing it this year. Oh yes, they're seeing it this year. What Fine Gael rely on is that they can tinker around with the Constitution and abuse people willy-nilly, and at the same time that those people who they abuse will not sue them successfully. 99.99% of the time they're right, but that doesn't matter. All you need is that 0.1% of the time where somebody will take them on and bring them into court and make them accountable for what they're doing. And then what you see is what Catherine Austin Fitz said, they're cowards and they're bullies. You get them into court and they're cowards. I won't say too much, but I know that from personal direct experience. They're cowards when you drag them into court. Something else that we're seeing this year, both with our general election in Ireland and the election that has passed to an extent in the United States, is writ large a particular psychopathic phenomenon. The psychopathic phenomenon of who you're going to call. What Thomas means by that is a psychopath abuses somebody, they do it openly, they do it overtly, and then they sneer at their victim by saying, well, what are you going to do about it? That happened in Ireland this year with our general election, because the Irish people, however you might want to construe that election, the Irish people really didn't want Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil back in. Don't forget, however much adulation Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar might be getting from RTE, that they were not returned on the first count. Harris was returned on something like the 14th count, and he didn't achieve the quota anyway. But that doesn't matter, because that very, very inadequate and foul man is back in office. So the Irish people didn't want Fianna Fáil. They didn't want... Micheál Martin didn't get his seat back on the first count, and he didn't top the poll. First leader Fianna Fáil not to. So what was clear from the election in Ireland this year was that there wasn't enthusiasm to have Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael back in government. It was very unfortunate that enough idiots voted for Fine Gael to get them back in to 35 seats, not to mention 18 Greens. So the Irish people are now reaping what they've sown, because they should have worked, and it's up to the electorate to do that, they should have worked with their votes to make sure that Fine Gael did not get back in. They didn't. Fine Gael got back in, because this is what happened next. Neither Fine Gael nor Fianna Fáil won enough to form a government, so what they did was they gave two fingers to the Irish people and they formed a government together. So having not wanted Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil back in, the Irish people got both. What has happened in the United States is, and there's very, very little to contravene this, that there has effectively been a coup d'etat or an attempted coup d'etat in the United States, whereby Donald Trump was very clearly online to a significant popular vote and electoral vote majority. He probably got it. And that's what's happening in writ large in the United States. The Democrats, who are the equivalent of Fine Gael, are turning around and saying, what you going to do about it? Who are you going to call? And this is when the psychopaths are losing their veneer, losing their respectability. They turn around and they become vicious. That is happening in the United States. And don't forget Black Lives Matter. Don't forget them either. Who are you going to call? But psychopaths are cowards and bullies, and I saw it myself personally with the mask thing, where I just said, I'm not going to wear a mask and I'll go to jail. I mean that. I would go to jail for that, absolutely. People don't realise the seriousness of the mask thing. It's trivialised deliberately. So on the one hand, RTE lies to us that we're legally obliged at all times to wear a mask, and on the other hand, then they don't acknowledge, first of all, that there are exemptions, and secondly, that it's not trivial to say I don't want to wear a muzzle. I remember a neighbour of mine had a dog who killed a cat. This particular poor dog, he was a cross between a basset hound and a German shepherd. You can figure that one out. And he had a hunter's instinct, so he chased rabbits and foxes and rats and that kind of thing. And he killed a neighbour's cat. The neighbour was very understanding because she was a dog lover herself. But in order to bring him out for a walk, the woman who would walk the dogs, and she did it for free, she just loved dogs, and she loved those two dogs. She loved my neighbour's dogs. Attempted to put a muzzle on the dog, so he fought with her. He was quite an obedient and well-behaved dog, but he struggled when she tried to put the mask on him. And then when she got the mask on him, he arched his back. He walked around with his back arched and his head down. So she put him on the lead, and he sat down on the driveway. And he refused to budge. So she didn't bring him 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And she told me afterwards she took the muzzle off him and she brought him out on the lead. She said, he broke off the lead when he killed the cat. What can you do? There you go. That dog's instinct railed against wearing a mask. It stuck in my mind this year. So if a dog, and dogs have great instincts, by its instinct refuses to wear a mask, so should we. So should we. And they know this. Mr. Global, knows this. Which is why they haven't prosecuted anyone for simply not wearing a mask. The liars in RTE and the Irish Times make out that individuals who got convicted were convicted for not wearing a mask. But then they have to admit, even that worm Conor Gallagher has to admit it, that it wasn't for not wearing a mask. It was for public order or other offences such like. So it's been an interesting year, and so many of us have been vindicated in our assessment of psychopaths and the terrible damage that they're doing. But what Catherine Austin Fitts said is absolutely true. They're incompetent, they're liars, they're fearful, they're cowards, they're bullies, they're lazy, they're complacent, and they only think in the short term. That's right, psychopaths do only think in the short term. That is a cardinal feature of a psychopath. So it's going to be an interesting year in 2021. I just saw on today's London Times, freedom possibly by Easter. Yeah, if you get that goddamn vaccine, not going to happen. And as I said to that woman yesterday, she's talking about returning to normal. I said some of us never left it. I'm in Facebook jail at the moment, so, hey, I'm still having fun on Twitter, because Twitter is much freer than Facebook. Twitter isn't for snowflakes. Neither was Billy Connolly's upbringing. That was not a snowflake upbringing, working in the shipyards at the age of 15 or growing up in the slums. But we're all still here, and many people lost their lives this year. Many people suffered terrible tragedy and terrible bereavement and loss this year. It's been a terrible year for an awful lot of people. There's been suicides, there's been accidental deaths. There's been a lot of trauma and a lot of grief for so many people. I thank the gods, the good gods, that it didn't happen to me. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening, whatever gender you choose, whatever continent or country you come from, whatever your background is and whatever your belief is, both my parents and I wish you a very, very happy, productive, peaceful and joyous 2021.